Okay, so it looks like we're ready to get started. So we will have Jonathan Eisler, who will provide an update on the English Learner Progress Indicator.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jonathan Eisler. I'm from the Accountability Division. I'm here to share some updates on the English Learner Progress Indicator. So just to talk through our agenda for today, so I'll be talking about an update on the English Learner Progress Indicator, a discussion of status and change for that particular indicator. We are going to talk through our proposal that will be brought forth in front of the State Board of Education in November to split the ELPAC performance levels 2 and 3 as part of our proposed methodology, as well as setting our local educational agency status cut scores at the November board meeting. And then I'm going to hand it over to Cindy Kazanis, who will give an update on the graduation rate, as well as a timeline for the dashboard. So we'll get started on the ELPI here. So please note that the CDE had a memorandum to the state board in August that provided some information about how the very low status on the ELPI will be used as part of assistance considerations in terms of the local control funding formula assistance and eligibility for assistance, as well as the Every Student Succeeds Act, the schools for assistance. This particular memo is located on our website at this link here. So if you have any questions about that, or if you have any wanted to know more about those updates, that is in an August memo to the state board. And then a couple other updates in terms of the last couple of months. So in September of this year, the CDE received an updated ELPAC file from our assessment vendor, and we have been running simulations with that data. But at the September board meeting, we did an update to the board about our status methodology, as well as give some information about some outreach we've had to different stakeholder groups, and I'll talk in a little bit more detail about some of those stakeholder groups and technical assistance. And we also gave an update about the school eligibility assistance determinations. Part of the feedback we received from stakeholders is that because this is a very complicated state indicator, and of course all of the state indicators measure very important metrics across the state. But one of the things that's particularly complex about the ELPI indicator is that it is by definition a progress indicator, meaning that we need multiple years of data to measure progress of individual students on that assessment. And we're going to talk a little bit in following slides about the particularities of this particular indicator, but because of the complexity, we're going to be working on creating some short and sweet kind of flyers and information that's readily consumable by the public, by parents, et cetera, because again, it is complex. So we're working on kind of messaging around this particular indicator and making it a more kind of user-friendly information. We also have developed what we kind of, our friendly name for it around here is the baseball card, or the official name is kind of the ELPI status on the dashboard. And if you remember last year, we only had 1 year of ELPAC data, so we were not able to produce status last year, so we just produced a report for schools and LEAs listing the percentage of students who fell into the 4 different categories on the ELPAC assessment. This year we'll have status, so of course the way we present that data is going to be different than we did last year. So we are actually going to be bringing to next week's California Practitioners Advisory Group is going to be looking at a version of that flyer, that handout, and what the display would look like. Please feel free to chime in next week at the CPAC. It'll be televised, and we'll be getting their feedback. We're also meeting next week with the ELPI work group. That work group is a membership of researchers, of EL experts, of people from districts and schools, from county offices of education, practitioners, and so that group is also meeting next week to dive into some of the more detailed information about the ELPI. And then just in terms of another stakeholder group, very important group, the technical design group met yesterday, and we'll talk a little bit throughout this presentation about their feedback on this indicator. They give guidance and advice to the department on all of the technical elements involved in our state indicators, and so they always give helpful advice and recommendations, and so we'll talk through some of that today as well. To summarize, at the next state board meeting in November, we will be asking for action on the methodology for the ELPI status in the 2019 dashboard, as well as using the very low status on ELPI as a kind of a proxy for red in the determinations for LCFF for the LEA eligibility, as well as for school for ESSA eligibility for assistance. So just a reminder, and it never hurts to remind people of this, because the ELPI is a unique indicator in that it measures progress, not just kind of a snapshot in time, but actually student level progress on this particular assessment, the ELPAC over time, we have to have 2 years worth of data to calculate a status. So now in 2019, we have 2 years worth of ELPAC data, so we're now able to calculate a status for this year. What that means, however, is that we're going to need a 3rd year of data next year to be able to calculate a status and change and then a color. So the kind of simplest way to put this is that between next year and between this year and next year, we're going to measure the progress of progress, or the change in progress. So what percentage of students increased a level on the ELPAC or maintained the highest level on the ELPAC this year versus last year, and then looking next year, what difference in progress has occurred between those 2 sets of years. So that's why we need 3 years worth of data. And again, last year, 2018, at the July State Board meeting, we put a memo out, and we also put a board item out last summer explaining the CDE's 3-year plan for incorporating status, change, and a color that will all be published for the 2020 dashboard. So again, just a reminder, this year we have status for ELPI, and then next year we'll have status, change, and color. So the point here is that because there are only 4 levels on the ELPAC, if a student progresses a level or maintains level 4, because you can't go any higher than the highest level, a school, excuse me, or an LEA will get credit for also having a student maintain at the ELPAC level 4. And I think we mentioned this already. We're going to need to look at the rate of change between schools and LEAs moving students toward English language proficiency. That's why we need 3 years of ELPAC summative assessment results. And again, we're going to be able to calculate change next year to see how on track schools and LEAs are in terms of moving those students forward. So one of the things, if you remember with the CELT, we did calculate the ELPI with CELT data. Obviously, we switched from the CELT to the ELPAC. And one of the things that, if you remember from the CELT had 5 performance levels. The ELPAC has 4. But what we looked at with the CELT, the 5 different levels, was how long is it taking on average new English learner students to get to proficiency. And on average, a lot of the research nationally and from different experts we've looked at and looked into the research on this, on average nationally and in California, it takes new English learner students approximately 5 to 7 years on average to reach English language proficiency. So this is the expectation for a student that would come in at level 1, at the very beginning level of the ELPAC or any assessment. So with the same expectation held for the CELT. One of the things we found with many years worth of CELT data was that a lot of students would make it to level 3 or intermediate, and then they would kind of get stuck there. They would spend 2 to 3, sometimes even more years within that intermediate level. And we noticed that with, over 10 years plus worth of CELT data. So one of the recommendations, what we ended up doing with the ELPI calculation with CELT, is we actually split in half that intermediate middle level for the CELT into low intermediate and high intermediate. So in other words, out of the 5 CELT levels, we created 6 quote-unquote ELPI levels. And that was consistent with the research of a 5 to 7 year trajectory. And on that second bullet on this slide, it's looking at 5 years worth of time that we would expect a student to progress. Because if you have 6 layers, if you assume that each year a student would go up 1 kind of ELPI level, you would take approximately 5 years. And again, the research shows 5 to 7 years. So it gives a little bit of leeway there, but that's kind of in line with the evidence that the research shows. So obviously now we have a new assessment. We have the ELPAC. We have 2 years worth of ELPAC data. And one of the things that stakeholders talked to us about and we talked to our technical design group about was how can we make the ELPI as comparable as possible across the two different assessments. So the first thing that kind of came to mind is, like, would it make sense to create 6 ELPI levels out of the 4 ELPAC levels? And obviously, we would have to do it differently than the CELT because the CELT had a different number of levels. And so we looked into, we consulted with psychometricians, we consulted with our technical design group, with our assessments division, and we looked at kind of the logic behind splitting levels 2 and 3, the middle levels of the ELPAC, into their own 2 layers themselves, which would create 6 ELPI levels. And you'll see in subsequent slides kind of what this would look like. And we have, we wanted to look into, when we did these simulations, we wanted to see what kind of movement we saw between the ELPI levels versus the ELPAC levels. And we also wanted to examine if there was any potentially statistical problems with doing so, or any kind of error. Anytime you have assessments, especially when students are right at the cusp between levels, there might be some error involved. We were very, very confident and assured once we actually looked at 2 years of data that the error bands or the error levels within levels 2 and 3 of the ELPAC were very, very low. A high concentration of students fell into levels 2 and 3 on the ELPAC for both years. And so we have a lot of confidence statistically and methodologically on the methodology we're going to talk about here in a second. And the technical design group absolutely was supportive, unanimously supported this decision or this recommendation when we spoke with them in depth yesterday. So that's very good news. But again, we're sharing all this information with different stakeholder groups to kind of explain what the rationale behind all of this is. So yes, of course, there's a question.
Okay, well, the fact that the test will be in different format, computer-based versus a paper pencil test in the spring, will that be taken into consideration in the calculations?
Okay, so I know you used the mic to ask the question, but I'll ask it again just to make sure everyone hears. So the question is are we taking into consideration that there will be a transition to a computer-based ELPAC next year versus the last 2 years have been paper and pencil tests? So absolutely. And again, we remind people that our accountability system is a continuous improvement system. We're absolutely well aware of the transition to the computer-based test next year. And there's a couple kind of implications for that. One is, again, next year we're going to be coming back in front of the state board and running data simulations to look at not only the cut scores, but also the cut scores for change. So we are very aware of that. We have several meetings already scheduled for next year with our technical design group, with our colleagues from the assessment division. We're in regular communications with our test vendor to make sure that everything is smooth. And again, we're monitoring the situation. We're meeting with the technical folks very regularly. That being said, one of the kind of benefits, and we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but we do want to talk about matching records between years. One of the benefits of switching from a paper and pencil to a computer-based test is that the ability to match student-level records year over year will get better next year. And the reason for that, is there another question? Or? Yeah, go ahead, Stephanie. One of the reasons why that match rate is going to improve is because, as you can imagine, with paper and pencil tests, they get shipped, via UPS or the mail or whatever, and occasionally we hear of instances they get lost, or they get sent to the wrong place, or they're late or whatever. So one of the benefits, of course, that's built into the design of a computer-based exam is that there's an instantaneous kind of digital transmission of the records via a secure, obviously, transfer. And so those kind of lost records are not going to occur. So our match rate will improve. So that's one of the kind of benefits of this. Yes.
Okay. Are the cut scores pure, or do they include confidence intervals?
So good question. So the question is, are the cut scores pure, or do they include confidence intervals? So we are not including confidence intervals in terms of like the reporting of this. But I will say the best statement I can say about this is that the methodology for which we're setting cut scores is very much aligned with the methodology how cut scores are set for all of the state indicators in terms of looking at percentiles and looking at distributions of schools and LEAs looking at percentiles. So we are not producing the confidence intervals, but we are using the same kind of aligned method with how we set cut scores for the other indicators. And I would also remind folks that we have shared all of this information with our technical design group, and they've vetted the methodology. Okay, great. So moving on to the next slide. So this is kind of a visual representation of what the proposal would do. Again, the ELPAC is 4 levels. The ELPI levels that we're proposing there are 6 of them. So levels 1 and 4 would stay the same. Those would not, the proposal is not to change those. The proposal is to split level 2 into 2 low and 2 high, 3 low and 3 high. And so in other words, there are more opportunities for movement between the levels. They can go up, they can go down, but creating 6 levels kind of, again, it's more aligned with this research that we've seen that it takes approximately 5 to 7 years for a new English learner student to get to full proficiency. I will say, just mention a comment that that we've reminded people to talk through, which is that at the September State Board meeting, there was a question about, what's the expectation for a student that comes in, a very new EL student, but they test at level 3, let's say. So again, the expectation is not for a brand new English learner student who initially takes the summative assessment and scores a 3 to take 7 years or 5 years to get to full English proficiency. In fact, in that case, we would expect maybe 2 to 3 years to get to proficiency. And again, this model is consistent with that, because if a school or an LEA is getting credit for the moving up or staying in level 4, then if that student stays in level 3L for 5 years in a row, for instance, obviously they would not be getting credit for the student increasing a level. So just wanted to clarify that, because we've gotten some questions about that. That assumption of 5 to 7 years really applies to a new English learner student that would be coming in at level 1 on the ELPAC. So this slide here shows the comparison of what the distribution of students would be, and this is all student level data of how many of these students increased at least 1 level or maintained the level 4 on the ELPAC, if there's only 4 ELPAC levels or if there are 6 ELPI levels. And then you can see, and I'm not sure why the D got cut off there, anyways, there's an earlier version of the slide, but in any case, then you can see how many maintained and how many declined 1 or more levels. And the thing that really jumps out on this slide, to me at least, is that the percentage of students who increased at least 1 level goes up by about 11%. So in other words, under the ELPAC, 37% of the students increased at least 1 level or maintained level 4. But using the ELPI, the 6 levels, it goes up to almost half, or 48% of the students. So that's important to note. And of course, any chance you have in movement, there's also the possibility of declining some. And under the ELPI levels, the 6 ELPI levels, that is an increase too, right? It would go from 13.9% to 20%. But again, the overall picture here is that switching from the ELPAC levels to the ELPI levels, the 4 to the 6, there's almost twice as many students increasing a level as there would be decreasing. So in other words, the net change here for the whole state and for schools and LEAs too actually is a net positive. So again, we're applying these rules consistently and fairly for all schools, all LEAs, and the net positive for the state effectively of doing this is a net positive. So just wanted to show you that slide to demonstrate that. Yes. Oh, there's a question, Sam? Yes. Yes.
On this chart, is the distribution similar across grade level?
So we are going to be sharing some information at the CPAG meeting next week for grade level. For the most part, the general answer is yes. It's pretty consistent across grade level. There are some differences at certain grades, but overall, grades 1 through 12, because this is a grade 1 through 12 indicator, it's fairly consistent, yes. Okay, so based on that student level data, we then did some analyses on LEAs at the LEA level. What would this look like? And again, using the methodology I alluded to a little bit earlier about how we set cut scores for status for our other indicators, we have determined that the appropriate cut scores for the ELPI for this year, very low would be less than 35%, very high would be greater than 65%, and then you can see the bands for low, medium, and high. And the way to interpret this is basically A very low would mean that your school or LEA, that less than 35% of your students progressed at least one level or maintained level 4 on the ELPAC. That's the way to interpret this particular metric, okay? And then, of course, for the very high, that would mean that over 65% of your students between 2018 and 2019 increased at least one ELPI level or maintained level 4 on the ELPAC. So if you look at how LEAs are distributed across the 5 different statuses, 5.5% of them are in the very low, 5.5% are in the very high, and then you can see about 50% are in the medium. So I actually have a question here about kindergartners. So I know there was a question about grades. So the question is, will kindergartners with 2 years of scores not be included in the ELPI? So that is correct. So in other words, because this is a grades 1 through 12 indicator, we are looking at 2019 ELPAC scores of first graders through 12th graders, and then looking backwards to the prior year to see if they have a prior year score. So if a student is kindergarten in 2018 and 2019, that is correct. Their records would not be included here. Okay, so just quickly talking through the distribution of districts. When we look at these cut scores, this is how the districts are distributed. And then for schools, we've done the same thing. And by the way, just to mention real quick, we did not include charter schools in the LEA distribution here, but we did include charter schools in the school distribution. And as you can see, this distribution of schools is a little bit more spread out than it is for LEA. So there's about 10% in the very low, about 8.7% in the very high, and then there's about 35% in the medium. And again, you can see 26% in the low and 20% in the high. So before we hand it over to talk about the graduation rate, I want to make sure there's any other questions on the ELPI. Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Cindy Kazanis with the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division. Jonathan, did we talk about status, use of status for identification?
We did, but I can mention it again.
Okay.
So thank you for the reminder, Cindy. So just a reminder, one of the other things that we're bringing forth at the November board meeting is that we'll be recommending that the very low status be used as a proxy for red in identification, or sorry, eligibility of schools for ESSA support and eligibility of LEAs for support under differentiated assistance. So yes.
Thank you for repeating that. So I'm going to go over this section, and then right after that, we're going to talk about the role of the dashboard, at which time we can talk about when the ELPI information will be available for preview for our districts and our county offices of education. So what is also under consideration is revision to the long-term goal for the graduation rate. And the Every Student Succeeds Act, I believe we've presented this piece in meetings past, allows states the opportunity to do an extended year graduation rate. In doing so, we need to set a more rigorous goal for that extended year graduation rate compared to what we have currently for our 4-year cohort. So we are coming into compliance with this because in July of 2019, this past summer, the board approved a methodology to implement the extended year or combined graduation rate in the academic indicator. What that means is that for our traditional schools who have students, who keep students longer than a 4-year, who may not graduated in that 4th year, extend their time at the school to allow them to get a high school diploma in the 5th year, we're including them now in our calculation for the graduation rate indicator. So at the meeting for the state board in November, in addition to the ELPI, there will be an item on ESSA, and the ESSA item will take up, we are recommending rather, that they amend, the board amend the ESSA state plan to adjust our long-term goal from 90% to 90.5% to comply with this piece of the Every Student Succeeds Act. Any questions? Okay, so moving on to the 2019 dashboard. We are actively preparing data and processing data to put out a dashboard the second week of December. What you see on here are the critical dates for our local educational agencies to adhere to in order to preview data, to make sure that they've submitted their local indicators. And so I'm going to walk through these very briefly. The first is actually a webinar that we are offering because this is the first year that for our state system for accountability, the local control funding formula, the charter schools will come into identification or support under the state accountability system. Charter schools have been identified for this last year for the first time under our federal system. But as part of the LCFF, there was a phase-in for our charter schools. So during this webinar on October 30th, we will cover in depth how charter schools, what the methodology is and the calculations behind it, and then just talk a little bit about how they're going to be supported under our system of support. November 1st is our local indicators deadline submission. This has been moved up by 2 weeks from previous years in order to accommodate the need to put charter schools into our calculations for support for the LCFF differentiated assistance file. So if you have any questions regarding local indicators, Jeff Brashears, I think, is next. And I don't know if you're not going to cover this, but you can always get a hold of the LASSO office at LCFF at cde.ca.gov. Sure. I'm going to pause for a question.
Does this include DAS schools/charters?
I'm assuming that the question may be in terms of the local indicators, and if so, yes, every single charter school is treated as a local educational agency under the state system, the state accountability system. Our DAS schools are included with their county office of education, so there should be local indicators submitted for the county office because they are the local educational agency.
So a clarification on that, DAS for DA eligibility, not just local.
I think that there's some confusion in the translation here. So let me start. I didn't bring the appropriate slides for this question, but let me try to walk through this. So DAS, when we look at local control funding formula and differentiated assistance, we treat our district offices as local educational agencies and county offices of local educational agencies. They specifically call out charter schools as local educational agencies. So DAS schools are traditionally, unless they're a charter school, are treated as a school underneath a district office, and that district office may be, in fact, a county office of education. So all county offices of education are required to complete local indicators, just like all school districts are required to complete local indicators, as well as every single charter school in the state of California. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to move on through a couple of webinars that we're going to be doing in November. So in keeping with past practice, as we prepare for the rollout of data, we will support that rollout with a webinar prior to the private preview. So again, these previews are available to an audience that's been identified by the Department of Education at a local educational agency. And the first set of indicators we'll be able to produce is suspension and chronic absenteeism. And the following period that you see there, November 5th through 8th, is when the actual private preview will take place. We'll then transition the following week into graduation rate and college career indicators with a webinar introducing the information and then actually doing a preview of the information. Just before that actually is when the state board meets, at which time we are going to be confirming what Jonathan just covered on the English Learner Progress Indicator. So we will be producing that last along with our academic indicators.
Cindy, have the times for the webinars been set?
They are in process, and we will be sending out a note to the field. I think it's with my signature in the next business day, so probably on Monday. So the times are, I don't have them off the top of my head, but I know that we've scheduled them on WebEx just like we're doing today. Great. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the next. Oh, sorry, one more slide. What is a little different than years past is we are trying to align our release of data between our two reporting systems. So of course we have our accountability system, which we focus on a tremendous amount during these presentations, but the department also supports and produces data about schools and districts using our web portal, which is called DataQuest. So DataQuest traditionally has information, historical information, and current information about suspensions, types of suspensions, as an example, chronic absenteeism, and graduation rate. So we will be producing at the same time as the dashboard publicly the DataQuest reports that would support that. So if you've been waiting to know what your graduation rate is that's calculated by the state, you will need to wait until that second week of December along with the dashboard release. Excellent. No further questions.
Great. So that concludes our ESSA stakeholder session for the day. The next stakeholder session is tentatively scheduled for December 9th at 1:00 p.m. It looks like we have a question coming in. And thank you. We did have, actually, it was a kudos. So they are proud of the commitment that the state is making to help our students get the skills that the diploma represents. So good job. Thank you to all of us, including our accountability team that's worked very hard on this. So to continue to receive updates, make sure that you're signed into the ESSA listserv. You can send a blank email message to joinessa@mlist.cde.ca.gov. If you have ideas for topics for future sessions, send them to essa@cde.ca.gov. Thank you so much.